And for those of you who came on late, I'm just going to read quickly this book, The Missing Piece by Shel Silverstein. And for those of you who have received teachings on the Dharma in the past, look out for different themes as we go. So, a kind of cozy moment for us all. The Missing Piece. I don't know if you can read it. Yeah, to get a little bit closer, it looks like. For Jerry. It was missing a piece, and it was not happy. So it set off in search of its missing piece. And as it rolled, it sang this song. Oh, I'm looking for my missing piece. I'm looking for my missing piece. Hi-de-ho, here I go. I'm looking for my missing piece. Sometimes it baked in the sun. But then the cool rain would come down. And sometimes it was frozen by the snow. But then the sun would come out and warm it again. And because it was missing a piece, it could not roll very fast. So it would stop to talk to a worm. Or smell a flower. And sometimes it would pass a beetle. And sometimes the beetle would pass it. And this was the best time of all. The little butterfly on top of him. And on it went, over oceans. Oh, I'm looking for my missing piece, over land and over seas. So grease my knees and fleece my bees. I'm looking for my missing piece. Through swamps and jungles, up mountains and down mountains, until one day, lo and behold, I've found my missing piece, it sang. I've found my missing piece, so grease my knees and fleece my bees. I've found my... Wait a minute, said the piece. Before you go greasing your knees and fleecing your bees, I am not your missing piece. I am nobody's piece. I am my own piece. And even if I was somebody's missing piece, I don't think I would be yours. Oh, it said sadly, I'm sorry to have bothered you. And on it rolled. It found another piece. But this one was too small. And this one was too big. This one was a little too sharp. And this one was too square. One time it seemed to have found the perfect piece, but it didn't hold it tightly enough, and lost it. Another time it held too tightly, and it broke. So on and on it rolled, having adventures, falling into holes, and bumping into stone walls. And then one day it came upon another piece that seemed to be just right. "Hi," it said. "Hi," said the piece. "Are you anybody's missing piece?" "Not that I know of." "Well, maybe you want to be your own piece." "I can be someone's and still be my own." "Well, maybe you don't want to be mine." "Maybe I do." "Maybe we won't fit." "Well?" It fit. It fit perfectly. At last. At last. And away it rolled, and because it was now complete, it rolled faster and faster, faster than it ever rolled before, so fast that it could not stop to talk to a worm, or smell a flower. Too fast for a butterfly to land. But it could sing its happy song. At last it could sing, "I've found my missing piece." And it began to sing, "I've found my missing geese, I've run my mitts and breeze, so grease my mees and bleeze my drees, I've found." Oh my, now that it was complete, it could not sing at all. Aha, it thought, so that's how it is. So it stopped rolling, and it set the piece down gently, and slowly rolled away. And as it rolled, it softly sang, "Oh, I'm looking for my missing piece, I'm looking for my missing piece. Hi-de-ho, here I go, looking for my missing piece." Okay, so has anyone, maybe raise your hand if you've read that before or familiar with him? Some waving. Half of you who have your camera on, maybe. Yeah, so Shel Silverstein has a bunch of really great books. You might have heard of like The Giving Tree and others. But what struck me about this, the more that I read it, to my daughter, I kept finding these themes, and of course, and maybe we'll have time to get into it. Just these sort of obvious, well, maybe not obvious, but sort of life lessons that we may be familiar with, having loved, having lived, this aspect of lack, of need, and of the search, of the longing. And of the finding and the not finding, and all of the things that unfold in that way, right? And so there's kind of these different levels to the book. There's this sort of outer, in especially Tibetan tradition, we talk about 3 levels of meaning or of significance to things. The outer level, which is sort of the apparent level, the inner level, which has to do with the kind of experience of things. And the secret level, which is the aspect of mind, which can also point to the wisdom dimension of something. And I see these 3 levels here in this book as well. And the outer level can be appreciated by even a child, and in the inner level, it connects with our own history, our own trials, victories, defeats, that kind of thing. In relationship, but also just in life in general. But then on a secret level, there's a really, I think, profound dimension to the book, and that's more what I'd like to introduce here. It begins out of nowhere, really. It just begins. It was missing a piece, and it was not happy. So that's referred to as it, is just sort of thrown into the middle of existence. Here it is, and 2 things are happening. One is it's missing something, and the other is it's not happy. And the implication is that these are connected, right? And so this is kind of the situation that we find ourselves in, especially, when we come to Buddhism. Generally, for a lot of people, it's because we are, looking for something that we haven't found anywhere else, and we are either, actively miserable or, just feeling that on some deeper level, right? And there's a call, and there's a yearning for deeper truth, of course. And we simply just find ourselves existing. You don't necessarily have to take an existentialist tack to this, but it's very much true that one day we wake up and we realize, here we are, right? Even leaving out ideas of past lives and so forth, it's just sort of a fact of existence. But actually, and this is really one of the greatest gifts of the Dharma, that isn't something that we should take for granted. There's actually a lot that's going on behind the scenes, in a sense, or before that point, or within each moment that we find ourselves. There's a whole process that has been set into motion because of different causes. And we find ourselves in this situation of not being happy or feeling a lack or whatever it might be, because of the operations and the sort of flow of causality that has brought us to this point. And until we either interrupt that and introduce a moment of perspective, a break, or we step off the hamster wheel in some sense, and let it run down and actually see our condition, or until we start to take measures that actually address that underlying unhappiness or lack of fulfillment. Until this point, when we actually apply what is the Dharma, we will just continue on in this sort of story, right? And that's kind of what happens in this book. But I'd like to focus, most of the time today, actually, in the page, before this. It's just the ground, right? It's just a line, and this is both the first page of the book and it's also the last page at the very end of the book. It's just a line, sort of like roughly drawn ground that everything happens on. It's like this stage, right? And this idea of ground is really important, both in Mahayana Buddhism and also in Vajrayana Buddhism. It's talked about in different ways, but there's an overarching sort of typology or way of viewing things that's called ground, path, and fruition. And the ground is our true nature, you might say, or the true nature of things, both subjectively and phenomenally in the world. And actually is before subject and object, and that's kind of the point here that I'd like to make. So there is this ground, and the path is the story, so the rest of the book, you might say, where we, through this lifetime of practice or many lifetimes, come to rediscover that ground, or to come to become familiar with our true nature as the ground. And the fruition is when that process is complete, when we realize through the path this kind of circle where we come back to the ground and recognize that, it is our true nature. But the difference being we are fully aware of that, whereas right now the ground is incipient. It is something that is obscured, buried in some way, and although there is awareness there that can never be broken, it hasn't become fully blossomed in our own awareness in this way. So sort of ground, path, and fruition, right? So the ground is talked about in different ways, from the perspective of the sutras. The ground is said to be Tathagata Garbha, or Buddha nature, and has these aspects of, on one hand, emptiness, which you might say is openness. It's completely free of any idea that we might have about it, any concept that we might lay on top of it. It's completely free of all of that. It's completely open and completely beyond. And in this sense, it is also full. It is full because it's not limited in any way by our concepts, by our presuppositions, any prejudices that we have. It's completely free of that, and therefore it's full. And it's full of qualities, and these qualities are have to do with its lucidity. So it is both empty and open, but it is also vibrant, alive, aware. It knows, right? There is a sense of knowing. And language is difficult. You can't say it knows, right? But there is just knowing. And these together are what is known as vidya. So the Sanskrit word vidya. In Tibetan it becomes rikpa, which is, you could say, awareness, but it's really this alive awakeness of open space. Right? So that is the ground. Then there's a number of ways in which we talk about how, based on that, what happened? How did all of this, this open, alive awakeness come to be this, it was missing a piece and is not happy. Suddenly we're there. What happened in between the ground of that first page and the situation of the missing piece on the second page where we find ourselves? And here there's different stories, and again, they differ in terms of whether it's coming from sutra or tantra, but still I'll stick with the more sutrayanic way of talking about it, but also using language of Mahamudra. So we have, and there's three different sources that I usually use when I talk about this. One is from Jamyang Kongtrul, in the Treasury of Knowledge, so this sort of encyclopedia of Buddhism. And I'll just read, there's a section where he talks about Mahamudra in the Marpa Kaju tradition, and there's a really succinct way of talking about this ground, and also the way that it becomes confused. So he says the abiding nature of the ground is without bias. So it's free of extremes, of elaboration. It's not experiencing delusion or liberation. It pervades everywhere like the sky. So again, there's this sky-like nature, open, empty, free of concept. Now, when it becomes obscured, what happens, he says, the naturally perfectly pure, luminous clarity is the Vajra of mind. When its natural expressive energy is not aware of its own essence, the afflictive mind stirs from the universal ground. So there's a sort of falling asleep or something. And this is when vidya becomes avidya. There is a mistake. My friend Lama Lena calls it the original oops. It's this mistake that is at the origin of everything. So when its natural expressive energy is not aware of its own essence, the afflictive mind stirs from the universal ground. And on top of that, on the strength of that, awareness is taken to be a self, and its reflexive appearance is taken to be an object. This is the basic subject-object split. So what he's saying is that there is awareness, basic vidya, and it becomes unaware in some way. And on the basis of that unawareness, there is a polarity that develops. On one hand, there's this luminous aspect, clear aspect, and there's also this empty aspect. The luminously clear aspect becomes mistaken as something other, and the open, empty aspect becomes mistaken as a self, or the one who perceives. So suddenly there is a perceiver and perceived, and this, from luminous emptiness comes appearance and perceiver, subject and object, and this basic duality occurs. And on the basis of that duality, there is, push and pull. Then there is a type of layering of emotion, klesha, on top of that push and pull. Then on the basis of desire, anger, and other elaborations of ignorance, we act, and those actions bounce off of the projected world, come back to us, and make us feel that we are really real and our projections are very valid. And then we take more action, and the whole situation starts to snowball and starts to build in its solidity and become more estranged. The duality intensifies. And this whole sort of situation then leads to the sort of experience of cyclic existence or suffering. Sort of starts this wheel turning, right? So that's one way of looking at it. Another way comes from, this is from the third Karmapa. It's called the Zamonangdan. It's the profound inner meaning, or profound inner principles. So vidya, this basic awareness, fails to notice its own essence with its own prowess. And out of the stirring of the cognitive force, which moves like waves upon water, things and apprehension both appear. Mind attends to and seizes upon itself. And so if you can imagine that there's like this water of, it's called alaya, or the ground, and when that ground is not recognized, then the wind of karma blows over it and starts to make little waves, and these waves start to build, and out of that situation a perceiver and perceived arise. So kind of a different image, but the same sort of situation. There's a failure to notice, and then that failure to notice leads to duality, and then the whole thing I explained before, klesha, karma, and the whole snowballing, right? Another way to explain it comes from Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I believe this is from Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And he talks about vidya explicitly, vidya. And he says, it's like this vidya becomes too active in space. So there's open space and awareness of that space. And it's like this awareness becomes a little bit too active. And he says it in other places, it kind of gets frisky. Right? Because it is spacious, it brings inspiration to dance about. So it's inspired to move, to express itself, right? But our dance became a little bit too active. We began to spin more than was necessary to express the space. At this point, we became self-conscious. So it's, this is much more rhetorical, but it's, imagine that there is this sort of boundless awareness and openness, and it expresses itself. It expresses power. In the other quote, it says it's prowess. Believe that's a translation of tsal, like this expressive power, right? And it gets a little bit too carried away, and in that becoming carried away, becoming too active, it becomes self-conscious. It's like the moment when we're dancing and then we get carried away, and then we realize that we got carried away, and suddenly we're out of the dance, out of the flow of the dance, and suddenly it's us in a room of people who are watching us, right? And we become self-conscious, right? So at that moment there is a blackout. There's a sort of forgetting, and the space has become solid, solidified, and the self is also solidified, and then the whole situation proceeds from there. And what conditions that, what happens next, is always comes down to the degree of, it's called zinpa, the grasping, nidzin, the grasping to duality, taking self and other. And the more intense that grasping, the more the whole situation perpetuates itself. And from this point we have what is called the three types of suffering. On a basic level, there is a sense of something being off, a lack, right? And this is called the unsatisfactoriness of conditioned existence. Meaning, once this whole drama of subject and object has been put into motion, there's going to always be something missing. There's never going to be, it's kind of a situation of addiction. We're always going to try to be leaning into or withdrawing, sort of imploding inward. But generally, it's conditioned by craving for something more, because whatever we get satisfies for a moment, but is never enough, right? And so it propels us to seek more, right, and to go further. And that energy, keeps the whole story running, right? But we don't generally notice that. It's on such a deep level of this really basic level of duality that we can't actually sense it. But it's sort of in the air, especially if you have had, experience meditating or any type of, non-ordinary experience, we start to sense that more acutely, right? But on the basis of that, the second level of suffering, which is called the suffering of change, this is when that underlying suffering becomes more noticeable. We start to notice that we get into the shower and the water is too cold, and we turn it up and then it's too hot, and then we sort of turn it in the other direction and find that it's just right, but then something else happens, right? It's never enough, right? And the suffering of change has this message that even within a moment of satisfaction, because it is us, the self, becoming satisfied by this thing, this other, and because that whole situation is deluded, fundamentally mistaken, not only will it not last, it will change, but it will create the seed. It sows the seed for future suffering, because we become attached to that moment of respite, that moment of satisfaction. And then to the degree to which we have that creates a seed for future disappointment. Or it just breaks down, and then we suffer because it breaks down, right, in that moment, right? So that's the sort of more palpable level, and this is something that the Epicureans and the Stoics have a lot to say about, how to relate to the suffering of change, so that we have more power of mind and strength of character in the face of this basic fact of existence. And there's a lot to say about that, which is excellent, but it doesn't necessarily point to the fact that there's a deeper level of suffering that is itself founded on a mistake, this ignorance at the basis. Then the third level of suffering is just manifest suffering. That's just the fact that we have a body and it's breaking down and that hurts and everything else, right? It's just things are not satisfactory, right? But it's these deeper levels of suffering that I think this book really does a good job of talking about. So, the missing piece is suffering, and he goes off in search, and he has this song that he sings, and I'm saying he, I can't really say he, it, they, but it sort of propels them, right? Propels them forward into this search. And then it bakes in the sun, but then it cools in the snow, but then it's kind of buried in the snow, and then it's like bumping up against things. I love the image of the arrow. It sort of has all of these misadventures. Up and down mountains. Where is that arrow? Anyway, he's sort of like finds the missing piece that is an arrow sticking in his mouth, which reminds me of this, of the famous situation from the life of the Buddha, where someone comes to him and and asks about suffering, and he says, you shouldn't ask like who shot the arrow and what is the material it's made from, and all of these extraneous questions. You should really inquire into the origin of the whole situation in the first place, right? So just a sort of side reference there, but the point being here that he's having all these adventures, right? And at the same time, there is a kind of poignancy to things, with passing the beetle or smelling a flower, and then that page where it says, and this is the best time of all, where there's a butterfly that's just sort of landed on him or it, and it's just sort of sitting there, there's that moment of joy, right? And so this sort of ups and downs and so forth, and that kind of sets the stage. And then it enters into this relational element where it's not just a kind of existential longing, but it's also translates into relationship, where we have this tendency to project onto an other, a significant other, an intimate partner, the fulfillment of this basic lack, this basic need, which is in our own mind and is the mistake that we are continually making moment to moment. And then when we, just like any kind of substance abuse, we're projecting the ultimate fulfillment of our needs onto this experience that we have, ingesting a substance or whatever it might be, or shopping, or any number of things. And when we put that onto a person, then it's a whole other dimension of crazy, right? And this is sort of the story of romance and all the rest. So then at first he can't find the first thing actually is he encounters a piece that seems right, and the piece sort of pushes back and says, no, I'm not that for you, and maybe you are looking in the wrong places, looking for love in all the wrong places, kind of thing, right? Then he goes about on, and he finds another piece and holds on to it too tightly, and it breaks, and another piece that he doesn't hold on to it tightly enough, and it's lost. And so there's this aspect of holding, and fitting, holding, becoming fulfilled, uniting. There's lots of different themes that we could draw out. It reminds me of something that Tinley Norburn Bichet has said about the base dharma in its essence amounts to, both in the root of the word dharma, to hold, but also dharma in the sense of Buddha dharma. It all boils down to the way that we are holding phenomena, holding phenomena of other, and whether that holding is something that is done with skill and wisdom, or whether that holding is done out of ignorance. And so, when holding is coming out of a place of ignorance, then we break things, right? Or things slip through our fingers, right? So I think it illustrates that really well. And then missing piece finds, another. It finds its missing piece, and then they have this kind of dialogue, and then they try it out, and it works. And then they get totally carried away. Finally, right? It's like this moment of union, of fulfillment, and then it just picks up speed, and they start rolling. and there's no time for the beetle, for the worm, for the flower, for the butterfly. It's just totally, self-involved and sort of ecstatic at the same time. But there's this pace to it. There's a speed to it that is suspicious, right? And then, this sort of motif of the song that it sings comes back again. And because its missing piece has been filled, it's not able to sing its song. And at that point, everything just sort of stops, because this is what allows for this moment of insight, this recognition that, oh, like something is off here, right? And I think it says a lot, and we'll talk about this hopefully in a minute, but there's two sides, to the song that we sing, creative endeavors in general. The way that we offer our gifts in the world. A lot of times it begins with a wound, something a way in which we have been wounded by others, or simply feel this basic woundedness at the center, the core of our being, that is this basic level of suffering that arises out of this mistake. And a lot of art proceeds from that place, the gap, the torn open space of that woundedness. So much creativity issues from that place. And oftentimes that is the song, that we sing. And it has a double edge to it. On one side, it's beautiful, and on the other side, it's painful, right? And then that can hook others, right? And because we feel that, we know what that's like, we resonate with it, we empathize, and we enjoy both sides. But it's kind of like this honey on the razor's edge, right? And it's enjoyable, but it's also highly problematic, right? And so then at the moment, if we could imagine receiving everything that we could possibly want, what would it be like to find, life circumstances that actually measure up to our standards completely, and a significant other or many others that are completely fulfilling of our preconceptions of what we want and need, to feel whole. And just imagine that for a moment, whatever that might be, that state of ecstatic wholeness, right? And then imagine in the very midst of that, realizing that it's not enough and could never be enough, because it's not about that. It's not about finding something outside of ourselves to fulfill ourselves, to fill that hole, that gap. Because that whole situation is based on duality, which itself is a mistake. And anything that is based on that mistake is never going to make up the difference, just by nature of it. It's always going to be slightly off. But then in that moment of fulfillment, letting go, as the missing piece is let down, let out, because the song cannot be sung anymore. And so at that moment, there's a tremendous potential for insight, whether it's because we suddenly have everything we've ever dreamed of, or because we recognize that couldn't happen. Either way, it doesn't really matter, but this is a really nice way of putting it, because we see even in those moments of total fulfillment that suddenly the song can't be sung anymore. And that's both a problem and a blessing, because then if there is a letting go, a fundamental letting go of that idea of needing fulfillment in that way, then as the book says, the piece, it rolls on, and it starts to sing its song again. And I think we can view this two ways. One is, in one way, it's just sort of a kind of human awakening where we say, oh, this is the way life is. I have to remain broken and open, and that this woundedness is a gift that allows me to create and to sing. And I think that's valid, and I think that's generally how humanistic culture views, in its best, views art and so forth. But we can also, what would it be like to imagine that in that moment, missing piece, or it actually was awakened, had a moment of recognizing the fundamental nature of reality and itself. And in that moment of liberation, there is a grief of loss, but there is also a type of awakening. And if we read it in that way, so he drops the piece and slowly rolls away, and you probably can't see it on the screen, but there's only a dot. He has a dot for an eye in his mouth. It looks pretty sad. He's pretty dejected. But then on the next page, as it starts to sing its song again and roll away, it sort of picks up its cheerfulness, and then he's sort of back to his total cheerful self, and the butterfly reappears. And this reminds me of Shuangzi, the Taoist poet. When the famous image of when he's writing about whether he's Shuangzi dreaming of a butterfly or whether the butterfly is dreaming of him. You can't really know in this interpenetrating illusion that is reality. And when from the awakened state, we see the dreamlike nature and the illusory nature of appearances. And when we know the ground as luminous emptiness, there is this dance. It also reminds me of the words from William Blake, from Songs of Innocence, where he talks about, how does it go? He who binds himself to a joy doth the winged life destroy. So it's like the butterfly or something, you bind yourself to it and crush it, right? He who binds himself to a joy doth the winged life destroy. But he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. So there's the aspect of kissing something as it flies, not clinging, not grasping, but simply celebrating the illusion, celebrating the freedom of non-attachment, living in eternity's sunrise, right? And so I think that's another way of viewing this. And so he's rolling off, and then there's this sort of final image of the butterfly, resting on his nose, and it's very cheerful. And then he disappears. The missing piece is gone, and it's just the butterfly. And this is what reminds me of that moment. Are we dreaming of a butterfly, or is the butterfly dreaming us? And it is sort of gone, and then the last page is this ground again, right? So anyway, I think profound dimensions of the missing piece, and there's a lot of Dharma in there. Anyway, so I'll open it up now if anyone wants to share or ask or.
Thank you. Lama Karma.
Yes.
Thank you for the talk. It's really interesting trying to tie the story with the Dharma, and it's very interesting how having that as a place to start sort of helps fill in and connect so many things. So I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone, the Catholic Natural Dharma Fellowship, for being here, so that we would have an audience for this wonderful talk. And just to remind folks that a way that we can, if we feel like it today, express our gratitude for this opportunity is to donate to Natural Dharma Fellowship, and we'll drop the link in the chat. But again, to just thank people for being here. Without the audience, there's no Dharma talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Lise. Thank you,
Can I
Elise.
jump in first?
Sure, and then Jennifer after you.
Oh, all right. So I don't get to listen to Mondays too often, but I did today. I came in a few minutes late, and I thought, wow, I'm really connected with this guy, what he's saying, and just the whole thing. And then I was like, I got to find out who it is. And then I heard Lama Karma, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and so you may recall I was listening maybe a couple months ago, and I said I really connected with what you had said. It was very expansive, different than I've ever heard, and so bingo, 2 out of 2. So thank you so much for bringing this message. I'm going to listen to it again, and
And what's your name?
I just my name's Scott, and I'm in Los Angeles.
Okay. Great. Well, welcome, Scott.
I knew of Wonder Well and Natural Dharma from when Lama John used to go out to California sometimes. So I looked it up last year during COVID, and so I'll hear you again and hopefully meet you sometime also.
Okay, great, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks. So Jennifer?
Yes, thank you so much. It's what perfect timing, because there was a discussion, and I forget which night it occurred on. It could have occurred on Wednesday with Joel. But in my question that night was about, and it's all on this topic, is our origination story. How did we get here? And so I always felt it was about desire, and you're saying it was about forgetfulness, that not losing that awareness. And it's like, how did we lose that awareness to begin with?
Yeah, no, that's the question, and I have that all prepared, but there's just not enough time. And there's lots of there's different ways of talking about it. The Buddhist way, like you're saying, is talking about it as ignorance. You can go to Sufism, for instance, and look at, and this is common to the theistic traditions. The reason there is that the ultimate reality wants to know itself more fully, or be more to appreciate itself more fully, so separates itself from itself in order for itself to be known. There's another, and you could also say that it is could be desire, it could be playfulness, that the infinite becomes finite, limits itself to become finite, so that the infinite can celebrate itself more fully when that finite thing remembers that it is infinite. And so there's lots that we could talk about there, and there's different ways of going about it, but I just stuck with the Buddhist one for now.
So thank you so much. I really enjoyed your explanation.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah. Judy, yep.
You said you read the story to your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
How old is she?
She's 3.
What does she react to in the story?
I'm
sure that there are pieces of it that
she loves. The best part for her is when the missing piece is just going along singing its song, and it finds this other piece, and then the other piece cuts it short, and it's like, wait a minute, no. And she just thinks that's the most hilarious thing.
Has that changed over the time that you've read her this story again and again?
No.
Okay, she's 3. Okay. Just trying to get another view of how this is seen. So she's just delighted in the energy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else, especially if you have a tendency not to come forward. Challenge yourself. Yeah, Joe.
Hey, thank you for the talk. Some of the stuff about the ground reminded me of like mirror. There's a lot of mirror metaphors in multiple different lineages. I don't know if that's kind of connected to that concept.
Yeah. Especially in the Dzogchen tradition. You can talk, so one way of talking about it is that, introducing the ground, you can oftentimes use a mirror, and there's different points you can make about that. When looking into a mirror, whatever appears in a mirror does not in any way change the mirror. Anything can appear. Anything can appear in any arrangement, at any speed, and none of it ever touches the mirror in a sense. And so this is getting at the quality of mind, that emptiness is accommodating of whatever arises. And in that capacity to reflect, there is also clarity, that whatever is being reflected is reflected without distortion, just as it is. Because the mirror takes nothing, because the mirror accommodates fully, appearances are reflected purely, just as they are, without any grasping. And so this mirror-like nature of mind, when we are resting in that, whatever is arising arises without any residue, leaves no trace, no wake. It arises and passes. And at the same time, that essence of mind is luminous, and what appears clearly. It's not just a vacant mirror. It is a mirror that is constantly reflective, and that radiance is also an essential quality of mind. So these are, there's lots of different ways you can use the mirror to indicate that, to point to that, and those are some of the ways. Yeah. You can also say that whatever is appearing in the mirror is not actually there. It's not in the mirror. It would be foolish to try to grasp something that is appearing in a mirror. And in the same way, appearances are projections and not real in and of themselves. Yet they appear and they function. And they actually function because they lack that substantial existence. So there are lots of ways you can go, but yeah, those are some of them.
Thank you.
Jennifer, did you have something else? Yeah.
Yeah. Are you from Woodstock, Vermont, or Woodstock, New York?
I'm living in New York.
Is Lama Bardo? Is he still in Woodstock?
Bardo Tuku?
Yeah.
He passed away.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
last year I think.
Sorry to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Good. I just really appreciate how, in this story particularly, there's a way of folding together both a kind of existential thing of lack, and also this more relational dimension of lack. And so it's not just that everyone is out to find someone else to fulfill them, right? It also points to it being, a sort of basic state of being, which I thought is, it's profound in a sense. And so then it's very easy to tie it to, dimensions of the Dharma. Right? But in any event, anyone have anything else before we close? Good. Well, thank you for Jennifer. What? Did someone have something?
This is Scott again with a quick one.
Hey, Scott. Yeah.
Could you remind me, if you're familiar, since you mentioned mirror, Dzogchen, that showed, I believe, the sunlight reflecting outside through a window onto a tub of water, and there was some further explanation about the intricacy of that. Does that ring a bell?
No.
Oh.
Let me know if you let me know if you find that. I'd be interested.
Yeah, there was something about it reflecting off of something, and yeah, okay. It was on a book in some bookstore. Used a book. All right, thank you. Thanks again.
Good. So let's do the dedication. May the pure, brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion, unstoppably until all are fully illumined and awakened. Okay. Thank you all.